It's very expensive to raise a child in the U.S.
I knew it was going to be expensive, but I didn't know it was going to be that expensive.
The free market works well in many different sectors, but childcare is not one of them.
Sending an infant to daycare in many places across the country is actually more expensive than in-state public tuition to send them to college.
When we looked it up, it turned out our daughter's daycare was more than Stanford's tuition. We didn't really start to dig into it until we had a baby and I was on maternity leave, and then the numbers really started to hit home, and it was like, how are we going to do this?
Many Americans are struggling to make ends meet. More than 12.5 million children in the U.S. live in poverty. Even middle-class families are increasingly struggling to pay for everyday expenses.
We stopped saving any money altogether. We were living paycheck to paycheck every month to pay rent in the Bay Area and pay for childcare.
In this country, we don't have comprehensive policies. And so that means we are working with piecemeal programs to try to help people make ends meet.
I think the United States has just been very reluctant, very conservative when it comes to these kind of family policies.
Improving the social safety net, lowering the overall cost of raising children in this country is both the right thing to do for American families and a smart thing to do for our entire American economy.
The fundamental issue is not that we don't know what to do. We know that children need stability. The way to get to stability is making sure families have sufficient resources and sufficient time. If we know what to do, how do we pay for it?
Here's why it's so expensive to raise kids in the U.S. and which policies could help Americans.
My name is Janice. I am a mother of 2 children, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and we live right outside San Francisco.
I'm Darren Geeter. I'm producer for CNBC. I recently just had my first kid, my daughter Alma. Basically, I've been on paternity leave for the last 8 weeks, so I'm halfway through. Everything is very expensive in New Jersey. People always warn you, like, there's going to be a ton of stuff that you need to buy for the baby, whether it comes with diapers or wipes, and we didn't necessarily understand how much we have to buy.
If we had 2 kids in full-time daycare, it would have been a lot more than rent. So that's why it just absolutely wasn't an option. And when we looked at the numbers for full-time nannies in the San Francisco area, they all charge about $80,000 a year.
We don't have concrete plans of what we're going to do with childcare, because we know that childcare can range anywhere from $1,000 a month, or somewhere it could be as paying as a double rent.
The average family with at least one child under the age of 5 typically spends around 13% of the family's income on childcare, according to a September 2021 Treasury Department report. That's about 1 out of every $8. That's more than what the average household spends on groceries, and nearly double what the government considers affordable for low-income families.
Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, the median Black family with 2 kids was spending roughly 56% of their annual income on childcare, a bigger share than any other racial group. And of course, we know during COVID, for all families, childcare centers and school closures were forcing parents to pay for childcare in ways that they never had to before.
For over 20 years, the Economic Policy Institute has produced something called the Family Budget Calculator. And in that, we look at basic expenses across the country: housing, childcare if you have kids, healthcare, transportation, food, other incidentals like household items, and your taxes. One of the things we noticed when we were doing this about 4 or 5 years ago is that childcare became more expensive than rent in many places across the country.
The most recent report released by the Department of Agriculture in 2015 estimated that for a middle-income household with 2 parents and 2 children, it would cost more than $233,600 to raise a child from birth through age 17. And that's in 2015 dollars. With inflation, that number translates to almost $286,000 in 2022. The report calculated it would cost the hypothetical family of 4 anywhere from $9,330 to $23,380 per child in 1 year. This range depends on the age of the child and income of the parents. Adjusting for inflation, that range in 2022 would be between about $11,400 and $28,600. But adjusting for inflation may not be enough. Childcare costs have actually outpaced inflation. Childcare prices surpassed annual inflation by nearly 4 percentage points in 2020, and that was before the worst of the pandemic inflation woes.
And that data is based on middle class two-parent households. Just think about what that cost looks like when we're talking about single parents, or if we're talking about families of color on the struggling end of the racial wealth gap in this country.
I'd say we're middle class for the area we're living in. I actually am not sure how some people get by living in the Bay Area that make less than my husband and I do. We cannot wait until next year because one of our children is going to public school next year, and we might finally be able to start saving some money again.
Families that are right on the poverty line on average, if they're white in this country, have $18,000 of net worth. Families at the poverty line, if they're Black in this country, on average have at or below $0 in net worth. Just think about what that $18,000 difference means to parents when their second grader falls off the monkey bars and they're facing unanticipated medical costs.
Policymakers acted very swiftly in the pandemic and enacted policies that had tangible, positive results for workers and their families.
We do a lot of family supports through the tax code, and sort of the most prominent example here is something called the child tax credit.
The child tax credit allows parents to deduct a certain amount of money from their taxes at the end of each year. That amount depends on several factors: household income, how many children someone has, and the age of the children.
The child tax credit, enacted in 1997 with broad bipartisan support, was enacted in response to slow wage growth, higher cost of living, and a growing tax burden for average households. It was enacted to help reduce the tax burden on families with children, to help reduce the cost of raising kids.
Congress temporarily expanded the policy during the pandemic.
The bill as amended is passed.
The tax credit was raised to $3,000 a year for children between 6 and 17 years old, and jumped to $3,600 a year for children 5 and under.
And for at least half of the year, it was paid out monthly. So both a kind of substantial boost in value and this monthly payment. So you're not waiting till the end of, when you file taxes the next year to get it.
And that provided a solid safety net to try to help families really make ends meet during those tough times. And it helped reduce hunger in families. Very tangible results of those kinds of programs.
In 2021 alone, the expanded child tax credit was estimated to lift 4.1 million children above the poverty line, and to reduce the number of children in poverty by more than 40%.
People who have children, that's work that families are doing, and it's work that they're doing on behalf of all of us. So this is a way to try to support families doing that work that allows them to choose for themselves how best to spend the money to invest in their children.
The pandemic's expanded legislation expired in 2021. As of 2022, the tax credit is back to its pre-pandemic levels, which maxes out at $2,000 per child, with the parents of younger children receiving a larger subsidy.
It's kind of a way to subsidize or support parents, but it typically has not included very low-income parents. We've excluded parents who don't have earnings, parents with disabilities, or, for other reasons that aren't in the labor force.
From the time it was enacted until last year's temporary expansion, the child tax credit was actually not made available in full to 50% of Black children and families because their family's income were too low.
It's important to me, I think, that we have a child tax credit that is not connected to a work requirement. To me, the child tax credit is paying for the work of being a parent, which is work that benefits us all. To attach additional work requirements to that sort of undermines this intent of helping families in a way that makes sense for them.
There are two other policies that economists and other experts advocate for when it comes to helping families: subsidized childcare and paid family leave. These policies go hand in hand because paid family leave means parents can stay home and take care of their children themselves.
The U.S. is the only OECD country that does not have a federal paid leave program.
Less than a quarter of U.S. workers have access to paid family leave by their employer.
There is a law on the books at the federal level that requires employers to allow parents to take unpaid leave up to 12 weeks, as long as the private employer has 50 or more employees.
When it's unpaid, it's not really an option. It's not really a choice that many families can take across this country. And it's not just low-income families or many middle-income families that are living paycheck to paycheck that simply can't afford to take leave how it is now.
What we see is that Black families, Latino families, Native American families, workers are less likely to be able to afford unpaid leave from work than white workers. Again, reflecting and enhancing racial economic disparities across the board.
There are some states and localities that have passed paid family and medical leave, and that provides for paid parental leave as one component of that to make sure that workers actually have the option to take that leave.
Each state with paid family and medical leave sets its laws up differently, but typically the law requires employers to provide workers with up to 12 weeks of fully or partially paid leave per year. The programs are often funded by payroll taxes from workers, with some states also requiring employers to contribute.
Paternity leave for me was 16 weeks, and that's full 100% salary. I wouldn't be able to do what we're doing without any kind of leave.
One of the issues with childcare in the US is it's a patchwork system. We have programs that fully subsidize for eligible children a childcare seat, programs like Head Start and some state preschool. We have tax credits that subsidize a portion of childcare costs for higher income families. And then we also have block grants to states to help them expand access. And the problem with all of these systems is that with this multitude of approaches, we're not getting close to universality or affordability. We're not helping the workers in these sectors, and we're not doing enough on quality.
There's a lot of value in having states move forward and do these kind of programs. But ultimately, to have it be something that's available to everybody everywhere, you need the federal government to be willing to make these kind of investments in care infrastructures.
There's so many moments that I would have missed if it was, back in the day where, fathers would get like 2 weeks. And those are some things that I will cherish for the rest of my life.
President Biden tried to address all of these policies at the federal level with his Build Back Better infrastructure bill that he proposed even before he entered the White House.
The president doesn't talk a lot about the Build Back Better bill, but that was his proposal that included things like an expanded child tax credit, like a near universal childcare program that would have capped the amount of income people had to pay toward childcare. It included a paid leave type program, really included these big building blocks of a better family support program that ran into opposition from one key Democrat, Senator Joe Manchin in West Virginia.
One of the things that I think is important is that we think about rebalancing our investments toward children because it pays for itself. If we were to rebalance federal investments away from senior citizens and toward children, not only would raising a child be more affordable in the US, but the children would have sufficient resources. Their parents would be better able to think about how they want to spend their time, whether it's that extra hour at work or an extra hour playing with their kids. All of those things become possible if we rebalance federal spending toward kids.
We know that investing in our children has a multiplier effect. What it means for those children's families, what it means for those children in adulthood, and what it means for the entire economy just have incredible ripple effects. And so investing in children actually impacts Americans of all ages, in addition to our entire economy.